So we've talked about benefit calculations, and that's complex enough, but there are other challenges around payments. Can you take us
Yep,
through what some of the other ones are?
sure.
I hate to go down the path of, oh my God, there's more stuff that's scary.
Yeah, yeah. So another example is waiting periods. I think you mentioned that earlier. Currently in the world of PFML, there's 3 states that use a waiting period, which means that the employee has to be off of work for a certain period of time before they start receiving pay. So Massachusetts, Washington, and Maine all use waiting periods. Maine hasn't gone live yet, but we're getting ready for it. But every one of those states does it a little bit differently,
Of
of
course it does.
course. So for Massachusetts and Maine, the waiting period will actually decrease the amount of time in the employee's time bank. So let's say the employee gets 12 weeks of leave. Well, that first week is not paid, and so then they get 11 weeks after that. But even within Massachusetts and Maine, there's differences there. So there's differences in how many waiting periods an employee has to serve per year, and things of that. There's a few other things, really tiny little nuances there. But I mentioned Washington. So the way Washington works is the waiting period doesn't actually decrease the employee's entitlement. So if an employee has a 12-week entitlement and they take 2 weeks of leave, then that week that's a waiting period didn't actually decrease their entitlement. So you only start taking time away once they're being paid. So little nuances and differences like that really do change how things work. So that's one example, waiting periods. I mentioned earlier benefit years. So some benefit years in some states, they use rolling forward. Most of them use rolling forward. In some states, it allows the employer to choose. Do they want to use rolling forward, rolling backwards? And then when you've got that nailed down, then there's the question of when does the state reset their average weekly wage? So states usually reset their average weekly wage once a year, and it usually either applies in January or maybe mid-year in July. But when that state average weekly wage adjusts, how does that impact the benefit? Does it impact it right away? Does it wait until the employee's rolling forward year resets? There's multiple different ways that this can apply, and it all depends on the way the state has laid that out. One other example I will give is proration, because this is a big one. So PFL benefits are generally calculated based on an employee's weekly wage, and it yields a weekly benefit amount. So let's say, an employee makes $1,000 a week, and we'll do the math and we come out with, okay, their benefit is going to be $742. And they take a full week of leave and they receive $742, nice and easy. But oftentimes an employee will take leave in less than a week. So how does that math work out? You might think, well, just divide it by 5 and you're good to go. Of course, nothing is ever that easy and everything has to be different. So some states, like New York, we talked about earlier, in Oregon, calculate the partial benefit based on an average of how many days that employee typically works. And of course, how many days they typically work is based on a lookback period. And that lookback period is not the same for New York and Oregon. But if you look at all the other states, not New York and Oregon, it doesn't matter how many days the employee typically works. It matters how many hours the employee typically works. And we use a proration that's more like what we would typically think of as the federal FMLA proration, which is an hourly rate. It might seem like that's not a big deal, hours, days, no big problem. But when, for certain employees that work based on their schedule, and if they work a few long days or a few short days, or 2 long days, 2 short days, depending on that, the days that they take off, it can actually really make a difference in how the benefit calculation comes out, depending on whether you're using like a New York and Oregon model or a Massachusetts and Colorado model. So it really can make a difference there. And, I'm just scratching the surface and probably putting some people to sleep here talking about these differences. There's so many differences like that where every state has their own unique nuance to it. And it really, you have to look at each state uniquely and apply those special rules. And that's, what we do at FINEOS is we build those rules. So every time a new state comes along and passes their law, we really dig in deeply, get into the nitty gritty, all those little nuances, details, scenarios that you didn't think of, and we build that code and handle it for you.